Hello everyone, I'm Liz Brown Swanson. Welcome to Peninsula Perspectives. We have a very exciting program ahead because in this show we are going to take a look at all the biggest and most exciting stories that took place right here in our community in 2009. And joining me right now in studio with all the headlines from 2009, I am very excited to welcome back here our regular guest, Ashley Radcliffe, with the Palos Verdes Peninsula News. Of course, you are the assistant editor. And here joining us on the show for the first time, but no stranger to the community, of course, is the PV News staff photographer, Tom Underhill, who we're just going to just take a look back and share just all the great stories that we all had the chance to take part in that shaped our community. And I do want to say, though, that you need to stay tuned because later on in this show, we have another dynamic duo from the PV News that will be here. Of course, Society editor Frank Brown and Society reporter, his wife Pat Brown, will be here to take you to some of the most exciting parties that happened here on the Hill in 2009. So stay tuned for that. And so we'll begin with you two. And 2009, as you look back, what do you think was the most exciting story and the biggest story you got to cover?
Well, for me, as part of my beat, I get to cover the Land Conservancy. And so when the Land Conservancy released goats in the Three Sisters Reserve, that was very exciting. They got to munch all the brush and really tidy up the preserve at a low cost and at an environmentally friendly way. And so that was exciting for me. And probably the biggest story, I think, in RPV throughout the year has been Terranea Resort. It finally opened in June, and it's been a long process, 12 years in the making, and so it's finally here.
And of course, I want to say you cover specifically RPV
Yes.
for the paper. How about for you? Do you share the same thoughts in terms of what would be the biggest and most exciting stories in the community in 2009?
Yeah, sure. The goat story, that was a really fun story. I can tell you a little story about the goat
We
story.
want to hear it.
Because Ashley was doing this story on the goats, and she got, you want to take a picture of the goats being released, and I was like, okay, so I find out where it is, and it was actually, they're releasing them down this kind of like steep road, and they were, all fenced off. So I was going to take the photo, and I decided, I placed myself like on the corner of the road so they would kind of go by me, and there's like a little like rubbery fence to keep the goats penned in. But as soon as they released them, I realized goats are really, really, really fast. And there's a lot of them. And I'm like going, this little rubber fence is not going to protect me. And the goats are like going to come flying over that rubber fence, and I'm just going to get like bowled over by goats and trampled to death by goats, and that would not be a good death. So I jumped up on a little rock and kind of shot the goats so they went zipping by. But I got a really nice, photo of all these goats like running and this herder running, chasing them behind it, and sent it to all my friends immediately, and they all loved it. So
A day in the life of being a photographer.
Yeah.
So that's. But what about the biggest story? That's probably the most exciting.
big, I guess it is Terranea for RPV. That would be definitely, we went there a lot, shot a lot of, groundbreaking, first time they put a nail in the ground. We're always going to Terranea, like every month for a Terranea story, so.
Right, and of course for that story, just from a photographer's point of view, you just sort of watched that as it kind of evolved, and it was like every time the landscape would continue to change, and so.
Yeah, it's always changing, and you're always kind of referring back to how you remember it.
Right.
For me, it was like, oh, I remember when this was marine land, and now this was here, and now it's not, it's kind of interesting to see it that way.
And as a reporter covering, you've been with the paper for 3 years, I know that. Did you expect it was going to finally happen? Did you think this is?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's difficult when there's just land, and then you see, things start slowly but surely coming up. And so it was, driving down PV, drive south, and then you would see, oh, that's, you've got to see it come to life right before your eyes.
All right. So I'm sure you'll be there a lot in 2010 as well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Lots of news and events there. I thought it'd be great before we looked at some of the other stories that you covered during 2009, just to share with our viewers about your background, just for starters, how you ended up at the PV News and sort of what inspired you to become a photojournalist and a reporter.
Okay. Well, as a youngster, I was very introverted. I still am, but I used to write a lot, and I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. And so, in high school, you have your electives and stuff like that. And so I was on my high school newspaper, and I really enjoyed it. And so I thought, I'll pursue this further. And so I went to UC Santa Barbara They don't have a journalism program necessarily, but they have a good communications program and a great campus newspaper. And so I just, kept with it and interned at the News Press down over in Santa Barbara. And when it was time for me to graduate, I was looking for openings, and the PV News called, and now I'm here.
Now you're here. And how about for you, your path to the PV News?
My path was, I started kind of doing art for them because that's primarily what I was doing in school. I was taking art and painting, and I've always been a photographer. I always grew up with, a dad always taking photos of the family. I thought my dad's face was actually at the top of his head and a twin reflex camera. I mean, that's really what I saw all the time. And I just always took photos all through high school and college, and I was, oh, that's an easy, couple of units. I can take a photo class, and boom, that's done. And then I just started shooting photos for the PV News, and it kind of took over.
You've been on board how long?
Probably 20 years, something like that. A long time.
Do you have a favorite photo from 2009?
A favorite photo?
Yeah, that you want to share with our...
There's a lot of favorite photos. It's like I shoot them and they turn out great, and you're like, yes, and then you're like, okay, on to the next thing. But I guess like one of the cool things to 2009 was we shot there was a B-17 that came down to Torrance Airport that had a lot of like former pilots on it and men that flew in that kind of aircraft, and we actually got to go up in the air with them while they were kind of like, they were just reminiscing about the whole
There's
experience.
A lot of emotion to those photos.
Right.
Sure.
While we're shooting, and it was just great. It was just, that felt really good. I liked that a lot.
What's a day in the life like for the two of you covering news in our community, and the challenges of reporting on news on the peninsula?
Well, and back to your first question, one of the things that I like about being a journalist is that no day is ever the same, and so it all depends. It's never, of course we have our, production timelines and things of that nature, but, I get in, check my emails, check my voicemail, see what's happening, and then just let that dictate the rest of my day. Being that we're a small staff, it does get a little, very hard trying to cover it all. And so we just try our best. There's myself, my editor, two other reporters, Tom, our photographer, and then Frank and Pat, who cover society, and we have two ad reps, and that's about it.
And now you're a weekly. I mean, we watch the paper.
Correct.
Yes.
Sadly, go from 2 days a week. I mean, I love it every day. I love holding a newspaper, and certainly your paper. But how has that changed in terms of your ability to cover stories? I don't know how much, your enterprising stories, people are calling you with story ideas, and of course your official duties of what you have to cover.
It's very challenging because...
In one paper a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least with, the Saturday paper, we could get stuff in that we couldn't, and it was just more fluid. Like, it was this constant thing where you're always working on stories, and so now you have to think about the way you cover the city a little bit differently. You can't, breaking news is a little bit different when you're only once a week. So we do utilize our website when stuff does come up, but it is hard being a weekly.
And that website's pvnews.com.
Yes.
That is correct.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some of the stories, more stories during the year that you covered. Again, I know, Ashley, you cover RPV stories, and since this is RPV TV, it's perfect for you to highlight what were the big things that took place. We talked about Terranea.
Yes.
What other stories?
McCarroll Canyon is the huge storm drain repair, and that was completed in July. It cost about $7 million, and so over there by PV Drive South.